You are now watching the 84th Annual NAACP New York State Conference Convention.
The NAACP, along with our adult and youth members throughout the state of New York, are frontline advocates committed to raising awareness for the political, educational, social, and economic equality for minority groups in the electoral process. Please welcome Joy Williams, Legislative Coordinator for the NAACP New York State Conference, along with her panelists presenting our 2020 Civic Engagement Workshop. Hi, Joy.
Thank you so very much, Tracy. With the federal elections less than 30 days away, our branches are hard at work turning out the vote to make sure we have a change in the White House, Congress, and locally. But we won't have much time to rest between Election Day and the new year. Looking ahead to 2021, we have a number of things our branches and civic engagement committees will need to focus on. Due to the economic impact of COVID on the state of New York, the legislative and budget cycle in Albany will be difficult. The governor and our representatives have already signaled that things will be tough, and we need to be prepared as we advocate on behalf of our communities. Second, we have municipal and local elections in 2021, and in New York City, voters will be faced with a new system for the primary elections called ranked choice voting. And lastly, the census. The census count will be completed at the end of the month, and in 2021, we will need to be prepared for reapportionment and the new district lines. I have a number of guests with me to discuss each of those things with the goal of preparing you and your branch to take action on these issues. We're going to start first in Albany and begin the discussion about the state budget and the budget season with Chantel Smith, the Chief of Staff and General Counsel to the Senate Majority Conference. Chantel, thank you so much for taking time to talk to us.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
So I want to begin with the lay of the land and what we're facing going into the next session.
So currently the state is at a $14 billion, as in B, dollar deficit. You know, when the pandemic hit, it hit New York the hardest. And with lack of federal resources, we're currently in a $14 billion deficit. And the first order of priority is A, to see the outcome of the federal elections, because what happens federally will determine if we get coronavirus CARE Act stimulus money. So if we don't have the money, we're coming into 2021 with a $14 billion deficit, and that will probably lead to a $18 billion deficit year 2021. So New York will be on the whole $32 billion.
And how does that, just thinking about that, right? Mm-hmm. So one, personally thinking about that and thinking about going into the next legislative cycle and thinking about advocates like NAACP coming up, demanding that we take care of the most vulnerable in our state, demanding that our programs not be cut and things of that nature. What does that look like with us coming to Albany demanding that?
So without federal funds, it means you're coming to Albany demanding money that we don't have. And if we don't have money, a lot of the programs that you or NAACP hold near to your heart will no longer exist or will be significantly reduced.
So thinking of that, like, what is the priority for the Senate leadership going into this cycle then?
I think going into the cycle, getting people out to vote so we can get a federal stimulus. Once we get the federal stimulus, we have things that we have to figure out. Aid to municipalities. Because people aren't working, property tax receipts are at a deficit. That means that's less money coming into the state. How are we dealing with the evictions and rent and, you know, people who have houses, homes and mortgages? What are we doing with education funding? You know, are we going to cut education funding due to a lack of resources? Are we going to be able to, you know, make sure everyone that's learning remotely, if remote learning continues due to the pandemic, does everyone have access to a laptop? Does everyone have access to, you know, internet access? Things like that. The priority is to make sure first we take care of New York in terms of the things that were neglected because we didn't have money this fiscal year. Deal with that and then deal with the upcoming deficit and possibly wave 2 that people predict that will hit New York and the country sometime in the winter. Yeah.
Yeah. So thinking about our response to COVID, obviously there are a lot of commentary that people have, and particularly for the NAACP, we have been concerned about the racial impact, right?
100%.
African Americans, Black folks in this state were disproportionately impacted by COVID in terms of death, in terms of care. And so thinking about that and thinking about also those vulnerable communities that already needed support and investment in those particular communities, those things compounded upon each other. You know, our focus obviously as NAACP is on Black folks, right? And so how do we, you know, make sure that Black folks are continue to be whole and our communities don't be ravished, even though the entire state is at an economic disadvantage? Like, how do you think that's possible? Particularly that the Senate leadership is Black, right? And so thinking about that same lens, you know, what should we be coming up to say and enforce and provide backup to make sure Black folks are protected in the state?
I think, you know, I think Corona brought to light a lot of the disparities that a lot of people of color are experiencing right now. So I think what people can do, be vocal, be involved, be engaged. You know, a lot of people don't want to be involved in politics because they don't think it makes a difference. It absolutely makes a difference. I think, you know, gone are the days where, you know, NAACP could bring a bus up to Albany because Albany is closed, and I don't foresee us opening the Capitol building for a while. So this, you know, engagement, civil engagement, whether it's email, calling your representatives, speaking to your representatives, just constantly being in touch, and you create the priorities for the communities that you see are having the worst problems. You know, the affluent communities have no problem calling their state senator and making sure their needs are addressed, whether it's a pool, a swimming pool in the school, whether it's, you know, they need extra, you know, resources for different things, they make their voices heard. We have to just make sure we're consistent, we're steady, and we're focused on the things that we need.
So you say that, and being the person as legislative coordinator for the state, you know, I annoyed you an increasingly amount of time during the last legislative cycle, and you know, and I have your number, so you know, I keep that pestering up pretty well. And so basically, what I'm getting is continue to pester you and the Senate leadership to make sure our communities get what we deserve.
I think, you know, I think actually police reform is a perfect example. I think we saw something unfold on TV. Everyone was home during coronavirus, and there was this, A, the disgust of seeing someone die on national television, but then B, the anger. And I thought that everyone, you know, white, Black, they were calling. You know, out of all the issues that we've done the past 2 years in the majority, 50A, repealing it, was the most emailed and called about issue in legislative history. So look at the transformative reforms we did as a result that electeds felt because of the pressure that you guys were doing, whether it be phone, email, you guys were on the line, calling me, calling leaders, and it made a difference.
Yeah, and so what you're referring to is the actions that we took on 58 and a number of the law enforcement reforms that we took during that legislative session is being challenged. So we will have to continue to be vocal to make sure that it's not overturned, the action that we took. And that's something that, as an example, you know, even though we're facing a budget crisis as a state, there's still a remainder legislative session, and there will still be things that we can do, right, that don't have a price tag associated with 100%. It that we can put. Talk a bit about
So there are a bunch of things that, as we say, are non-fiscals. They're just legislative issues that do not cost money to the state or do not cost money to localities. Some are revenue generating, like marijuana would be a revenue generating legislative item that has come up in Albany, but we've never been able to get it past the finish line. I think that would be something that we're going to take a look at. I'm trying to think. There's a host of different legislative issues that people will be holding us to the fire, whether it's, you know, additional police reform. You know, the governor did an executive order where municipalities are supposed to look at their police departments within their jurisdictions and suggest and provide additional reforms. I know that walking while trans is something that other people have been bringing to our attention, and it's something that, you know, will be considered and delve into. And just any equal rights bills, there's tons of items that we still have to do. There's always things that you can find to do in Albany.
Well, Chantel, thank you so much for taking the time. I will continue to pester you.
Oh, thank you.
And
Keep my number private.
Okay, yes, and NAACP will continue to be in communication with our elected officials, and that even though we have a fiscal crisis, that does not mean we remain silent about our pain or silent about the things that we need to see addressed in our state. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be right back. We're going to take a quick sponsor break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk about the census.
For those living together and those living apart. For classmates, graduates, and teachers making the best of it. For the restaurants delivering to our doorsteps. For the frontline workers putting it on the line every single day. For this great nation determined to be stronger on the other side. Thanks to all of you, we'll be together again.
Welcome back. We're continuing our discussion looking ahead to 2021 on civic engagement, and we're going to talk now about the census. Yes, we were able to, on a national level, due to a lawsuit, to get the end date for the census put back to the end of this month. But we are not done. After the counting is another process. It is reapportionment and making sure that the lines are drawn fairly and equitably. And to have this conversation about what comes next and what our branches need to do to prepare is no stranger to New York State NAACP, is Esmeralda Simmons, the former executive director, the founder of the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers, and now a racial justice lawyer, retired, but still working. Thank you so very much for joining us.
Pleasure to be here. Always a pleasure to be at the conference.
Yeah.
And a proud Brooklyn chapter.
Yes,
Great
wonderful.
member.
So I want to talk about after the census, because people think that once the counting is done, that that's over. But as you and I know, and as probably many of our NAACP members know, there is more to do after that. Talk about what comes next.
Oh, well, folks, that's why there was so much a big braha about changing the date for the census, because there are real dates put on when the census results have to be handed over to the President of the United States. And there's like almost a secret courier that has to go to every governor to tell them what their numbers are. And why is all of that so significant? Because that's when they find out how many Congress people they have. That's when they find out what proportion of the money they're going to get from the entire U.S. budget annually, by how many people have been counted in their state. And that's what will also let them know where the people have moved in their state, whether they moved out, moved in, moved around, and what are the hot spots and what are the things that have to be changed. But they don't really get to change it themselves, not the governors. And in New York State, folks, we're in a new day. I hope you're hearing there's a trend here. Everything's new. We're in a new day. Instead of the legislature creating the lines, or as they've been doing for Congress, not even bothering to do it and leaving it to the courts, and litigators like me who run into court and say, no, black people need this, black people need that, and the Constitution says XYZ, they created, through our referendum, a referendum approximately 7 years ago that is going into effect right now. It's the New York State Redistricting Commission, which is supposed to be independent, but a court had to tell them that they weren't independent. So strike that word independent, because everybody has been appointed by an elected official. Hope you heard me. Everyone on the commission was appointed by an elected official. The speaker, the majority leader of the Senate, etc. And there's a major role for parties in redistricting commission. So there have to be somebody of this party, somebody of that party, so many people who weren't engaged at all. But what are they going to do? They're supposed to draw the lines for the Congress, for the Senate, and for the Assembly. And some of you are saying...
The state Senate and the Assembly.
State Senate. U.S. senators represent the whole state, so they don't have any lines. They're representing all of us. And some of them I know that know what all this is about. They say, well, what happened to city council? Or what happened to my county legislative branch? Well, folks, all of this is going to be happening at the same time. And the good part is that what you can do this time is significantly more involved than it has been in the past. Why is that? Because now there is redistricting software online, free, that you can go and start messing around with right now if you want to figure out where you want your lines to be. But we need you to get engaged. We need you to know what redistricting is. We need you to know which lines you have to protect. We need you to understand that redistricting is about voters, not about protecting elected officials. Let me say that again. It's about black voting power. It's not about protecting elected officials. Now, if they are somebody that's an incumbent and people want to protect them, that's okay. But that is not what redistricting is supposed to be about.
I think that's an important part because even as NAACP folks, people have favorites in terms of their elected officials. And as we know, we should not have favorites. Our favorites are the people and the issue that we're addressing. And so as you talk about what we need to prepare ourselves, as branches need to prepare ourselves, one, we need to educate not only the branch leadership, but our branches and our members about reapportionment. We need to make sure that we have dedicated members to participate in the process from beginning to end.
Testifying.
Right?
There's going to be multiple hearings.
Right. So we need to make sure that we have an educated base from our members of our branches to participate in this process along the way. So the Civic Engagement Committee, but also just general members of our branch can participate in that process, understanding what reapportionment is and actively participating, and making sure that we are protecting voters and not protecting elected officials and their seats as we go to draw lines.
Right. The good part is this is an opportunity for all of our branches to bolster up younger people who are very, very savvy with technology and get them to learn how to do political geography using this software. And as I said, the software is available. And the commission and the various local commissions may also have software or public access terminals where people can go in and draw lines. But understand, I don't want to mislead you. Yes, you should look at your city council seat, you should look at your state senate seat, you should look at the Congress seats in your area, but understand that they have to fit in the jigsaw puzzle of the entire state. So if you draw something that doesn't fit with anything else, it's just going to be an outlier and nobody will pay attention to it. Yes, you heard the word without my saying it. Coalition. Mm-hmm. You need to be talking to your neighbors. Rockland needs to talk to Westchester. Westchester needs to talk to New York City. Long Island needs to talk to New York City. Buffalo might need to talk to Rochester. Oh! And etc. But we all know that while many of us know that we are losing population, black population in New York, we have to understand we've also gained many immigrant populations, and everybody counts. It's not just voters. Everybody counts because everybody was supposed to be counted in the census, and we use general population data to draw these lines. It's very significant. We want some new experts coming up. You can get people trained. This is a beginning course on getting involved in politics, getting involved in civic engagement, using technology. The entire system is run by technology. And yeah, I'm not a techie, I'm a lawyer, but I need to know how that runs. So I've learned it, and anybody can learn it. So it is possible. It's an empowerment tool for all of our branches. And when they come up with their maps and they start talking to the various elected officials and going to the hearings, there's going to be a big, the NAACP is on it. And maybe you'll have several maps and be able to draw something that's a conglomerate of New York State. And we will need that. We will need that. I know I'm going to be involved with the Center for Law and Social Justice and a whole Unity Map crew, and we're going to be talking to the NAACP. You are the influencers. You're the ones that can tell us what you want, and we'll be listening. Because guess what? We don't draw maps for our purposes. We draw maps for the constituents. And the constituent groups are the ones that influence the lawyers, the election lawyers, and the redistricting lawyers, the voting rights lawyers. And that will influence all of the maps that come out of the state. We want to see you there front and center.
Thank you so very much, and thank you for that brief introduction. And Esmeralda and the whole HOSA team will be engaged with all of our branches as we gear up towards the reapportionment fight. And it will be a fight. This is why we as branches need to make sure we have a crew of people to go through the entire process. We'll take a quick final break, and then we'll talk more about ranked choice voting.
There are memberships for all kinds of things today. But what about memberships for bigger things? Human things? What about being a member of the family? With all of its truths and trials, bad days and good? What about being a member of the community? With all of its unexpected smiles and knocks, hellos and waves? What about being a member of humanity, with all of its questions, challenges, possibilities, and hope? What if there was a membership that gave us the time to do the things that really matter? One that celebrates the things that connect all of us. Welcome to a different kind of membership.
All right, for our final discussion, we're going to talk about 2021 municipal elections, particularly in New York City. But those of you who are outside of New York City, don't tune out because this may be coming to a town or a municipality near you. We're talking about ranked choice voting, which is the new system that we will be voting for in New York City for our primary elections. Now, up front, I will say the NAACP in New York did not support the ballot initiative that was put on the ballot to implement ranked choice voting, and our reasoning was based upon the time necessary to educate the public about this new process. But voters voted for it. It was overwhelming in terms of the people who voted for it, because not everybody did. But we have a responsibility as NAACPers to educate our communities and voters about this new process. And joining me to have a conversation about this, about ranked choice voting, is Jamila Rose, who is the Deputy Public Advocate for Community Engagement and Civic Engagement in the New York City Public Advocate's Office. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And you like my clarity on ranked choice voting position? Okay, great. So let's talk about first what ranked choice voting is.
Okay, sure. So just to get started, ranked choice voting, we voted on it last year during the ballot initiatives. 70% of the people who voted said yes, they wanted it. And it's a way and a new system for us to elect candidates in primary elections. So normally we elect people, there's a single way to elect them. It's called a single choice system, meaning whoever gets the most amount of votes, even if it's only 35 to 40% of the overall vote, it's like winner takes all. They win the election, and whoever does win, even if 60% of the people didn't want them there, they are now the candidate for everybody. So ranked choice is just a new system that allows us to then rank and choose people, and we have several votes. So we can say, I have 5 choices. I want to pick candidate A first, I want to pick candidate B second, and then you continue on until you complete your tally. At the end, we drop off the candidate with the least amount of votes who has lost the election because they don't have more than 51% of the vote, and then anyone who voted for that person, their second choices and their third choices are then assigned to the rest of the candidates. So it's really just a new system. I know it sounds scary, but it's really simple to use. So far, over 2 million people across the country have used ranked choice voting, and it's known to actually amplify the voices of marginalized communities. So that's what it's about.
So you talk about the number of other areas, number of cities that use ranked choice voting for their primary. And to be clear, we're using it for the primary. This will not also be for the general election. So for the primary election, you will rank the candidates on your ballot in your order of preference. And then whoever wins that will then go on to the general election where we will still vote winner takes all like our normal way.
Correct.
Okay, so I just wanted to be clear that this is not a system that will be for both elections. This is just for the primary, which means we no longer have a runoff election.
Exactly.
Okay, so we will not have to spend the extra money and do another 2 weeks of campaigning and making sure to turn out voters for that system. So this is what this is supposed to replicate. Now let's talk about the ballot, because if you think back to how this ballot initiative was placed on the ballot, when people voted for it, it was kind of small print. And so if you're talking about putting candidates on the ballot for mayor, public advocate, controller, borough president, and then city council races, and then if there are any other things on a race, you know, one of our other concerns was about how small the text may be if you have to bubble in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 for each of those races.
Yeah, and we do have a text size issue in New York City. And I think what we're going to have to focus on over the next couple months as we get ready for the primary that's coming up in June of 2021 is just educating the community on what is actually on the ballot. What does that ballot look like? How do you fill it out? Do you need to put 2 bubbles, 5 bubbles, 3 bubbles, whatever? And that's going to be the primary concern for all of us. You know, it's important that we understand that ranked choice is just a tool, and in the electoral process we have multiple tools, but it's like if we're not proficient in that tool, then it's a losing battle. So that's really what we need to focus on, just educating everyone. This is how it looks. This is how you can identify the candidates. This is how you vote, and these are the results that you would have after.
Yeah. So talk a bit about what we as branches should be doing. I know what Brooklyn is going to do, and we're perfectly willing to share our plan to educate Brooklyn voters about this process. But give us some tips or suggestions on what we can do to help educate and empower people on this new system.
Sure. So I'll start off by saying, first of all, the city is supposed to roll out a whole educational platform for ranked choice voting.
Wait a minute. Okay, go on.
I would say that, you know, as the NAACP, one of the oldest and largest civil rights organizations in the country, it's time for us to put the gloves on, educate our own communities. You are a membership-based organization. We have volunteers. We have people who are very proficient in every type of civic engagement. Educate ourselves first. That's the first things that we need to do. Then after that, we need to hit the grounds in communities, Black communities, Brownsville, East New York, Flatbush, East Flatbush, Black immigrant communities, and ensure that everyone knows and that the information that we're giving them is not only real and plain language, but that it's culturally competent so that they can actually understand what's happening. I am concerned about our seniors. Especially my grandmother, I've spoken to her about ranked choice voting, and she's like, me no want hear that, you know, and she's Jamaican, you know, and so it's like we have to be very intentional about that information that we're getting out there and making sure that people are understanding what we're saying. Do not rely on the city to roll out their platform in whatever languages they will roll it out in. Rely on each other, and that is my advice to the members of the NAACP. You've been doing it for so long, and you do a great job at it, and that's what we need to continue to do, boots on the ground.
Yeah, I think that's important in terms of our branches. One, in educating ourselves about the process, internally as our leadership and as our members, and then being able to arm our members and our volunteers to go out into our catchment areas and educate everyone else about this new process. So as just a quick check, again, ranked choice voting is a new system for the primary election, which will be June 2021 in New York City. So that is 5 boroughs of New York City. But even those of you who are watching in other places around the state, New York City will be the first of the largest cities in the United States to adopt this system. So people will be watching, and if this is a system that New York City is able to pull off, don't sleep that it may not come to other places around the state. So it is important to educate yourself about this process as leadership so that we can educate others about it as well. Additionally, just because we know the city is deficient in terms of how they're going to educate our communities, don't mean that we don't continue to advocate to push the city to invest more financial resources in educating the overall community about this process. We continue our advocacy role, pushing the city to do what it's supposed to do, while also doing what we need to do in our communities. Thank you so much, Jamila, for taking the time to talk to us about it. And making sure that we educate everyone, and thank you for the Public Advocate's Office and the work that you will do to educate our communities.
Count on us. Thank you.
So that's it as we do a taste of looking ahead of what's at stake in 2021 as it pertains to civic engagement. I want to say to our civic engagement chair, we all wish her speedy recovery so that she can come back and continue the work of the NAACP that we know that she loves and invests every single year. And thank you so much, Scotty Coates, our civic engagement chair, and we love you and we look forward to seeing you back soon. Thank you.
Now, Our panelists are going live to answer some of your questions.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you so very much for tuning in to the Civic Engagement panel discussion. This is just a taste of what we have looking forward to. And as I said in the beginning of the presentation, we have no rest. And even after 2021, there still isn't any rest. We'll be going in to make sure that our communities stay engaged. We do have two of our panelists who are on with us, Jamila Rose from the Public Advocate's Office, who talked to us about ranked choice voting, as well as Chantel Smith, the Chief of Staff and General Counsel to the New York State Senate and Majority Leader. Thank you so very much, ladies, for taking a Saturday afternoon to join us for any questions. There were some in the beginning. I'm going to start from Jamila. There was a question about, looking at New York City as the microcosm of implementing ranked choice voting in the state. What should other branches and other parts of the state who are not part of New York City, how should they prepare themselves if it is possibly coming to their jurisdiction?
Sure, and I think I touched on it a little bit during the conversation, but I think the most important thing that we can do as advocates and as ambassadors for civics in our communities is first learn what it is. I mean, there are a few websites that are out there. There's, I believe it's called Fair Vote. You can Google ranked choice voting. You can look at all the different ways, the videos that can prepare you. They have tutorials on what it looks like to do ranked choice voting. And then begin to also think about a plan, a strategy and a plan and an outreach plan for your own communities, and even how you will, I'll use the term loosely, lobby, your elected officials for what you want to see in those municipalities. So I know for us here in New York City, it's been a challenge, and our office is working closely with advocates and also the city administration to make sure that ranked choice is rolled out effectively. But we know that it's not going to come without hiccups and without some disappointments, but we're hoping for the best, and we're fighting to make sure that, we are there to mediate and between the community and city agencies and any issues that may happen. So I would say that is probably the best thing that you can do as a branch. First, get educated, know it inside and out, and be able to advocate on behalf of and against anything that you think may potentially suppress a vote in your municipality. So
yeah,
that's my answer.
So one more question on ranked choice. We had a funny moment talking about what the city was supposed to be doing, and the city has already missed two deadlines. They kind of, they've been kind of lax in presenting a plan in terms of how they're going to educate the city about ranked choice voting. And there are some real concerns that COVID has presented in terms of budget cuts, in terms of this time and resources to be able to fully implement an education plan. What is the Public Advocate's Office doing right now to address that issue before we get to January and begin another election season?
Sure. So one of the first things that we had to do was educate ourselves also on what was supposed to be happening in terms of the timelines for the rollout of ranked choice. We've been in communication with our city agencies, our New York City Campaign Finance Board, as well as the other entities that are involved, New York City Democracy, NYC, and also advocates, just to make sure that we're keeping our finger on the pulse. Right after this current election, you'll probably see a lot more aggressive advocacy from our side after the census is over and this current election is over and we finish getting out the vote in our communities. And we're going to make sure that we have some plans in place before the end of this year, knowing that next year there really wouldn't be enough time. We can't wait till January and we can't wait till February to really begin to push the city. So that's pretty much where we are right now. Most of our advocacy has been on census related efforts, and also just making sure that, the elections are safe for people to go to the polls this current November and October for early voting.
Great. Thank you so very much. Don't go, because I'm going to talk about just this current election really quickly, but I'm going to go to Chantel. And, we had a conversation, Chantel, talking about the budget deficit that the state is going to be facing. And particularly if we continue these restrictions and the Capitol is still closed, once we go into the beginning of the new year, and the advocacy that we're used to doing as NAACPers will need to reimagine. What are you all already seeing from advocates, you know, in terms of communication with the leadership, given these restrictions that the state is already under?
Everything's virtual. A lot of Zoom meetings, a lot of Zoom like group meetings or Zoom platforms where people just collectively go and express, you know, whatever things that they want or would like to see, or, you know, advocate for various things. Like people are like using the phone more, definitely Zooming. And then they do, even though they can't go inside the Capitol, they do, you know, they do protests outside the Capitol. They do outside district offices. And whenever they have a chance, they are very aggressive in inviting the local electeds in an electronic platform. You know, no one can say they don't have time because everyone's usually in their house now. And I'm pretty sure we're probably going towards a second lockdown soon. So more people will be home and have access to Zoom meetings.
That's a great way. And like I said, we'll have to reimagine for the New York State Conference how we're doing our annual lobby day and our engagement. And I know for our branches, we are in communication with our local elected officials pretty frequently. And so they're hearing directly from us. But certainly being able to communicate with the leadership is something we will continue to have to do and reimagine in a virtual way. Going back to Jamila, talking about the current election cycle, and Chantel can talk also about what state legislature is doing regarding this issue. We did see a problem here in Brooklyn. Once again, we had the Great Purge, and then now we, you know, get mail-in ballots with the wrong names. I'm still trying to investigate if I can sue to get a better Board of Election system, because Brooklyn seems to always bear the brunt of problems. But talk about how the Public Advocate's Office is advocating not only for Brooklyn voters, but voters all over the city. And Chantel can talk about the state who are experiencing these issues and these problems trying to get their vote in. You gotta unmute, Jamila. There you go.
Sorry about that. For whatever reason, it was stuck. Okay, yeah. So when we first got the reports about the misnamed ballots and the errors on the ballot, and everyone really was hoping that it was just a very small incident, and then we found out that it affected a whole lot more people than we originally knew. You know, almost 100,000 ballots were mailed out. For those of you who are outside of Brooklyn who may not know, almost 100,000 absentee ballots were mailed out to Brooklyn voters, and a large portion of those ballots had the wrong name on them, on the inside envelope, on the oath envelope. And so, you know, immediately we sprung into action. You know, we heard the cry from the advocates. We saw the news. We held our press conference to let people know. We've done an emergency town hall to let community know. I know that there have been some electeds and some individuals who've been calling for like major changes right now. And our emphasis, you know, and just being in alignment with, you know, community, and being in alignment with those of you who are on the ground right now, and some of you maybe even in the chat and in this session, you know, the overall goal right now is for us to restore voter confidence. We have this guy in the White House, you know, Trump. He's talking about fraud and the way that voting by mail, you know, could be fraudulent and all these things. And these are some of the myths that we need to dispel. So right now is not necessarily a time that we're necessarily calling for firing of vendors or the restructuring of our two-party system, but that is something that, you know, post-election, we're all going to be looking into a lot, you know, and we're all going to be talking about it. And right now, the main goal and the work of our office is really just restoring voter confidence, voter education, making sure that people are seeing, opening those ballots if they actually filled out an application and received them, looking at the inside envelope, seeing if their name is correct. If it's not correct, knowing that there's a second envelope coming and that they can fill that out and that they should do that as soon as possible, you know, to mitigate any issues with USPS or whatever. So that's really where all of our efforts are.
Thank you, Jamila. And we will certainly, as NAACP, be continuing to reach out on the city level, those branches in the city, and then also to our state legislator, Chantel, to make sure we are continuing to improve on our voting system here in the state of New York. There is no reason we should be as backwards as we are, and we will continue to advocate not only for improved systems, but even the Voting Rights Act bill for the state of New York, Chantel, that we're trying to get passed on the state level. So I'll be pestering you about that too. Thank you to our panelists for tuning in. Thank you for those of you. I hope you got some great information that you should take back and share with your branches. And thank you to Scotty, who did amazing in the robocalls that she administered in the state, I think over 9,000. And we, as NAACPers, have worked hard for early vote in the state of New York. It starts October 24th, my birthday weekend. So we look forward to all of our branches and giving that information to our communities for them to turn out to vote. Tracy?
Thank you very much, Eljoy. Excellent, excellent panel. And thank you so much for shouting out Scotty. Scotty is on the line. So the president wanted to make sure that she said thank you to Scotty. So please give her some love as we go.